In the early 1940s, as the Pacific War expanded across distant islands and blistering heat, Japanese tank crews carried an unshakable belief. Their Type 95 Hago tank was a battlefield predator. It had raced across China, rolled through Malaya, and crushed early resistance in the Philippines. Every campaign taught them the same lesson: speed, daring, and discipline could overwhelm any enemy. They believed their tanks were perfectly designed for the jungles, for narrow trails, for the chaotic shock of sudden armored assaults. But the truth was waiting on Saipan, hidden beneath the surface of a battle that would rewrite everything they thought they knew about war. The Hago itself had humble beginnings. A decade before the Pacific War, Japan's army knew its older tanks were too slow for the mobile warfare sweeping across Europe and Asia. Military planners demanded something new, something light enough to cross swamps and rice fields, fast enough to outrun infantry trucks, and simple enough for Japan's limited industry to mass produce. Engineers delivered exactly what was asked of them. They crafted a compact, agile machine with a 37mm gun, thin armor, and a diesel engine sturdy enough to run for hours in harsh climates. During trials, the Hago surprised everyone with its speed and maneuverability. It could twist around obstacles, climb difficult slopes, and dart across open ground faster than anything Japan had built before. But what impressed in testing would become a fatal weakness in real combat, because the entire design relied on one assumption: that the enemy would never possess serious firepower. When deployed in China, that assumption seemed justified. The Hago moved through villages and river valleys with almost no opposition. Chinese forces had few anti-tank weapons, and the lightweight armor that would later be a death sentence was more than enough in those early years. The crew's confidence grew with every victory. They learned to trust their tank completely, to believe that the cramped interior, the hand-cranked turret, and the thin plating were minor inconveniences, not warnings. Even clashes with Soviet forces at Gol in 1939, where Soviet 45mm guns pierced Hago armor with terrifying ease, didn't shake the conviction of Japan's leadership. They dismissed the losses, insisting better training and refined tactics would solve everything. The crews, loyal and determined, accepted that explanation and returned to the Pacific certain their tanks remained worthy of confidence. But the Pacific would test them against a force unlike anything they had faced before. Saipan was not just another island. It was a strategic heartland. If the Americans captured it, their long-range bombers could strike the Japanese homeland. Thousands of Japanese soldiers were entrenched there, determined to make the island a final barrier against collapse. Among them was a powerful armored force, the 9th Tank Regiment, armed with Hagos and a handful of larger tanks. Their commanders believed a decisive counterattack could smash the American beachhead. The crews, hardened by years of service, prepared their vehicles with the same ritual as always: checking engines, tightening track links, loading ammunition, and squeezing into the metal shells that had carried them from victory to victory. None of them imagined that those tanks, trusted companions through years of battle, were about to betray them in the most unexpected way. Before dawn on June 17th, the regiment rolled out. The darkness trembled with the sound of dozens of diesel engines. Dust lifted from the ground as the formation moved toward the American lines, the crew straining to see through narrow vision slits. Most tanks had no radios, so commanders waved signals in the gloom, trying to maintain order as they descended toward the battlefield. They believed the surprise would give them the upper hand. They believed momentum alone could shatter the American line. They believed the Hago would once again prove its worth. What they didn't know was that the Marines had been listening to those engines for minutes, quietly preparing their weapons and waiting for the tanks to emerge. The first Marines saw the outlines appear, shadows swaying in the dim half-light, and opened fire. That moment shattered one of the deepest assumptions in Japanese armored doctrine. The Marines weren't firing artillery. They weren't firing anti-tank guns. They were firing heavy machine guns. And yet, the rounds didn't spark harmlessly off the Hago's hull the way Japanese crews had always experienced. Instead, the armor-piercing rounds punched straight through the steel plating as if it were nothing more than sheet metal. Sparks flashed inside the tanks as bullets tore through the interior. Some rounds entered one side of the hull and exited the other. Crews felt the impacts rip through the cramped compartments, striking ammunition racks, fuel lines, and men who had believed their armor would protect them. Shock filled the tanks as the crews realized something unthinkable was happening. Ordinary infantry weapons were killing them. For many, this moment didn't feel real. Some officers later admitted they believed the Americans must be using some secret new ammunition. They simply couldn't accept that a weapon mounted on trucks, jeeps, and foxholes could destroy an armored vehicle. Their entire understanding of warfare broke in an instant. And that was only the beginning. As the machine gun fire tore into the formation, American Sherman tanks advanced. Their arrival erased any remaining hope for the Japanese crews. The Sherman was larger, heavier, and built for the industrial battlefield the Hago had never been designed to face. When Japanese gunners fired, their rounds bounced off the Sherman's front armor without effect. When the Sherman returned fire, its 75mm shells ripped open Hago turrets, shattered hulls, and sent fragments of steel flying through the air. Tanks erupted in flames as crews tried desperately to escape, some climbing out only to be met by fierce defensive fire. Others never had the chance to open their hatches. The counterattack, planned as a bold strike to restore the front, deteriorated into chaos within minutes. After the sun rose, the aftermath revealed more than destroyed tanks. It exposed the truth Japanese crews had never been allowed to see. Marines inspected the battlefield and found clean holes punched through the Hago armor, evidence that heavy machine gun fire had been enough to destroy vehicles the Japanese had trusted for years. Inside the tanks, the cramped compartments were mangled. Bullet holes lined the turret ring. Ammunition had exploded inside several vehicles, turning the interior into twisted metal. For the surviving Japanese crews, the emotional toll was immense. Everything they had believed about their equipment, everything they had been taught, collapsed under the simple fact that their armor had failed them. This wasn't just a tactical defeat. It was the moment Japan's industrial limitations became impossible to ignore. While Japan's factories struggled to produce a few thousand tanks over 8 years, American industry produced tens of thousands of modern armored vehicles in a fraction of that time. Entire factories ran day and night, building tanks at a pace Japan could never match. For every Hago that rolled off a Japanese assembly line, America produced dozens of armored vehicles with thicker armor, better guns, and superior communication systems. The crews on Saipan weren't just fighting better tanks. They were fighting the weight of an entire industrial empire. After the war, captured Hago tanks were examined in detail. Engineers documented everything. The thin face-hardened armor, the cramped turret with no dedicated gunner, the limited visibility, the manual traverse, and the unreliable communications. They noted that even though the tank was well crafted for its original purpose, it simply did not belong in a modern battlefield dominated by high-powered weapons and mass production. Every detail told the same story: a vehicle designed for a different conflict, forced into a war it could not survive. And that is the tragedy of the Hago. The crews who entered Saipan believed they were fighting with machines capable of victory. They believed their armor could shield them, their weapons could destroy any threat, and their training could overcome any disadvantage. But by the end of June 17th, those who survived carried a new and devastating understanding. Their tanks had been obsolete from the moment the battle began. Their armor couldn't stop bullets. Their guns couldn't threaten American vehicles. Their engines carried them into a fight they were never meant to win. Saipan didn't simply expose the weakness of a single tank. It exposed a flaw in Japan's entire approach to war, a belief that courage alone could overcome the harsh realities of modern industry.